And so we had people that were watching from home texting saying something's wrong. It's up and down, and I saw all the guys back here scurrying around, and they were working on trying to get that squared away. And I think it didn't really happen until 15 after 12. Finally got squared away. So we'll just chalk that one up. I don't know if Joel can. I don't know how did it do on your phone, Joel? Did it record?
It cut out too.
It's still cut out.
Yeah.
The version I have will load up okay.
Okay. So it ain't a total loss.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Joel was innocent
this time. I've already been sharing with the new people that they're not allowed to talk to Joel for 6 months. That's just the normal thing. If you're new, you don't talk to Joel for 6 months. David says it should be a year, right, David?
He said you should have warned him.
Oh. So,
Did they pay their parking?
listen, don't. See, this is what I'm talking about. It gets worse. 2 Kings 17. Now, when you open up 2 Kings 17, and you begin to deal with and see, well, in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea, the son of Elah, began to reign in Samaria over Israel, and he reigned 9 years. So he's the last king of Israel. Now here's what we've worked our way through Samuel, we've worked our way through Kings now. And when you get to the division, the divided kingdom, Israel never recovers from that. They never recover. They never have a good, solid king to lead them back to Yahweh. It's not like Judah where it's up and down. It's always down. And you get to people like Ahaz where it's more down than the one before him. But they never get back up. They never get back up off their knees. And so that's what you've seen, all the way through. Is just a disintegration of the northern kingdom. And they've had more prophets than anybody. In fact, what we've noticed is that the school of prophets was in Israel. The school of the prophets wasn't in Judah. The school of the prophets is in Israel, the northern kingdom. And Elijah, Elisha, all those, the ones that Jonah. You don't usually incorporate Elijah, Elisha, Jonah together, but you should. He was in there. We don't hear much about him. We don't know much. We have a verse and we have a book. But Jonah came right after Elisha. The northern kingdom gets missionaries from the southern kingdom. We've been looking at that. To go up and preach and get arrested and get in trouble and be threatened and be killed. And so, tonight you're going to see finally somebody, as they write 2 Kings, lay out this is what happened and this is why the destruction. But here's the deal. The difference between what happens in 722 and what happens in 586. Now, that'd be northern and then the southern kingdoms. So what happens between the difference between the two is that when the Assyrians would come in, they would come in, take over, begin to round everybody up and decide who was going to go where in their kingdom. They did not leave you in your city. They didn't leave you in your town. They didn't leave you in the country unless you just escaped capture. They rounded everyone up. And this wasn't just Israel. This is what they did. And they would take you and put you in whole new lands. And they would take the other people from those other lands and bring them and put them in your city, your town, your house. So that's what happens. So Assyrians were going to bring in Gentiles from all over the world, and they're going to move them into the northern kingdom. And that's where they're going to stay. That's their new home. And eventually they're going to intermarry with the remnant of Israelite ladies that are there. And by Jesus' day, they are going to be known as the Samaritans, half-breeds. They're going to be hated. The land is going to be hated. I mean, in Jesus' day, they would go up the Jordan so far, and then they'd cross into Idumea, and then go up, and then cross back into Galilee. But they wouldn't go through Samaria. Well, that's what Jesus did when he meets the woman at the well. He's going through there. I guarantee the disciples do not like it. We've talked about that. Let alone, come back and Jesus is talking to her in the middle of the day, and all that goes with that. So, that's the result of what's about to happen. It's the result of that. And so, the northern kingdom lasts from 931 BC to 722. That's how long they last. Really, the United Kingdom is only about 120 years, 125 years. With Saul and then David. I mean, about the time they figure it out, David comes to power and takes over and becomes a real live, honest to goodness, functional king. And then Solomon spends the first half of his life being a pretty good king, and the second half of his life just destroying the kingdom. And by the end of his life, it's just a mess. In fact, it's such a mess that God stops talking about him in 2 Kings 10, and just the only thing we learn is that he died. If we didn't have Ecclesiastes, we wouldn't know anything about Solomon in the second half of his life, and all we know is that it was debauched, and he did anything he ever wanted to do, and at the end, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, but at the end he says, listen to the most important thing. Listen, fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. And so, what they want by Jesus' day, well, from the Maccabees, 90 BC, 93, 4 or 5 BC, to Jesus' ministry, what they're touting and what they're preaching and what they're wanting, be honest, they don't know a lot about it. I mean, they were a divided kingdom twice as long as they were a united kingdom. And Judah was even longer a divided kingdom, because from 722 to 586 they're going to exist. But we know that Judah is taken away in 3 groups: 605, 597, and then 586. And so the first group that leaves, that's Daniel, Shadrach, and a bunch. And then the second group that's taken away would be Ezekiel. They're taken to the Kibar River, and that's where you find him and all the ones that are carried away. And I'm sure there's other people. This is just what we know. And then 586, they decide to come and destroy Jerusalem. And they do destroy it. And those that aren't killed, the few that are left are carried away. But here we are, from 931 to 722, you have the northern kingdom. And so in chapter 17, you begin to, it leads up to verse 6, you begin to get an idea of what is going on. So I don't know, it'll take a long time to go through this tonight, but it will set the stage for the rest, what we're going to do for the next several months. So, in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea, the son of Elah, began to reign in Samaria over Israel. Hoshea began to reign over Israel. He reigned 9 years. And again, which is no surprise, he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Yet not as the kings of Israel who were before him. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria. And Hoshea, became his vassal. And everything is good until Hoshea quits playing ball with the Assyrians. Hoshea became his vassal and paid him tribute. But the king of Assyria found treachery in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and offered no tribute to the king of Assyria as he had done year by year. So at some point he gets sick of fooling with Assyria and sends a message to So, the king of Egypt, and says to him, I'm willing to pay you to help us get out from under the Assyrian rule. And somehow Shalmaneser finds out about it. Finds out about Hoshea trying to make an alliance with Egypt to deliver them from their oppression, from the tyranny, from the payments. So when the king of Assyria hears about what he's trying to do with Egypt, the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. So after he did this, the king of Assyria invaded all the land and came to Samaria, and for 3 years he besieged it. So this is the beginning of the end of the northern kingdom. So in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. And so here's what begins to happen. He captured Samaria, and he carried the Israelites away to Assyria. So he carries them to Assyria. Look, that'd be like he carried them to America, or he carried them to Russia, he carried them to China. That's not a pinpoint place. Assyria was immense, like Rome would be immense. So he gives us some names where he took some of them. He took them to the Habor River of Gozan in the cities of the Medes, the cities of the Medes. So he spreads them out in a whole foreign land with foreign language, and they're made to stay there, and they do stay there. I think because God sovereignly did this. This is judgment, and whether or not they could figure out how to get home, or they just accepted their fate, accepted the reality, and actually may have liked it. I mean, look, the ones that were deported to Babylon, when it was time to come back, most of them did not want to go back. In fact, most of them didn't go back. A few people went back. Or, I don't know, maybe total 50,000 people, maybe. Total, 3 groups coming back, maybe. Probably not that many, but close. So, God has brought judgment on Israel, the northern kingdom. I mean, And you begin to look from 722, seriously, you begin to look from 722 to 1940. What goes on there from the Crusades thrown in the mix is a mess. I've got a bunch of books about Israel before World War One, before World War Two. Actually, one is during World War One, and what was going on in Israel. They lived side by side with the Arabs there. They had no problem. It was not a problem. And they had done that for a long time after the Crusades were over. And it was just it was not a big deal. But when God's timing kicks in, things change. So here they are in the cities of the Medes on the Habor River, spread out throughout Assyria. Verse 7, it begins an important section here. This occurred. 3 years of sieging Samaria and the eventual taking over of Samaria, and then the carrying away of the northern kingdom, Israel, occurred because the people of Israel had sinned. Now, this dude is about to sound like the writer of Chronicles. His thing is he's not worried about Israel. The writer of Chronicles isn't worried. His thing ain't Israel. He don't worry about Israel. He don't talk about Israel very little. His thing is Judah. Because, I know this is not really here, but here's why the writer of Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, that period, is not worried about Judah, is because he's focused on the returning exiles from Babylon, which would be Judah. He's not worried about Israel. They're gone. They're history. They're gone. They're spread. It'd be like trying to go pick up salt out of somebody else's salt shaker that you put in and shook it. God only knows where they are. It's not like they disappeared, because you see mention of them in the books of the Bible later, especially in the New Testament, that of Northern Kingdom people. So it's not like they disappeared entirely, but for the most part, there was never a Northern Kingdom again. It was over. Whereas God brings the Southern Kingdom back with Zerubbabel, and then Ezra, then Nehemiah. But what happened to Israel, the Northern Kingdom, is that this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against Yahweh, their Elohim. Their Elohim, Yahweh, their Elohim, the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt. These people that God had brought from the land of Egypt have sinned against him, and for 200 plus years. And he describes that. So, this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods. They had sinned against Yahweh, their Elohim, and they feared other Els, with a little E-L. So, they've sinned against the covenant God that revealed his name to Moses to tell Israel, who is now in slavery in Egypt, tell them that the I Am has sent you, and I Am is the creator. They chose the little Els, E-L. They chose the little gods, the little G-O-D-S. They chose nothing. They sinned against the true Yahweh Elohim, and they served El. The most generic word for God that means nothing. Yahweh means, Elohim means, El means God with a little g. It could be anything. Not only did they do that, they walked in the customs of the nations. And the whole purpose is, when you find where they've been worshiping and you see what they've drawn on the walls and you read what they've done and how they've worshiped their gods, you can't worship Yahweh that way. Tear the building down, burn the building, get rid of the building. You can't worship me that way. This is how you worship me. Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy rehashes it. This is the only way you can worship me. The only way I can stay in your midst and bless you is that you do it this way. You can't worship me however you want to, especially the way they've been worshiping Chemosh and Baal, etc. You can't worship me that way. And so they feared these other gods. They walked in the customs of the Philistines, and they walked in the customs of all the ites, Hittites, Hivites, Jebusites, Girgashites, etc. They walked in their customs, whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. And in the customs of the kings of Israel, that the kings of Israel had practiced. And boy, you pick a king. What they practiced. Look at Jezebel. Ahab. They built it up to 400 and something prophets of Baal. Then they're going to have 400 again later. So, the people of Israel, verse 9, did secretly against the Lord their God things that were not right. Now, when I read this verse about Monday this week, I spent Tuesday pondering it. You did what? The people of Israel did secretly? They did secretly against the Lord their God things that were not right. They did it secretly. Shh. Yahweh Elohim will never know. The covenant God, the I Am, who is the creator, the Elohim, the creator of all that is. We're going to keep this under the table. He will never know. They did it secretly. I've pondered it and I've researched it and looked stuff up and I've tried to run the word, and the word is secret. Under the table, underhanded, behind the back. It screams, we don't know the Bible. We don't know God's word. We don't know God. They did secretly against the Lord their God, Yahweh their Elohim, things that were not right. Well, it's not secret to God. Here we are, 3 years later after the sieging started, and now the siege is over and the walls have been breached and everybody's being killed and the rest of the area is being rounded up, and now we're going to be taken. And God says this happened because they sinned against the Lord their God. The people of Israel did secretly against the Lord their God things that were not right. Here's a list. They built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. They built high places that they would go and worship. Most of these, when you hear stuff like this, the thing that they loved about the other gods of the Canaanites, all the way to the Perizzites, is that how they worshipped their gods was immoral. And they were trapped in it. They liked it. And they thought, why not? Why can't we? We're worshiping your name, but we're going to do it this way. So, and later as we get to 586 and you begin 605 to 586, you're going to see, and if you read 2nd Chronicles, 1st Chronicles, 2nd Chronicles, they're going to name it in detail over and over and over. This is what they did. They built these things. They put them on high places. They put them under green trees. They worshipped this way all the time. It was immoral all the time. And they set up for themselves pillars and Asherim on every high hill and under every green tree. There they made offerings on all the high places, as the nations did. Hey Samuel, we want a king like the nations. We want a kingdom like the nations. They worship like the nations. And so there they made offerings on all the high places, as the nations did, whom Yahweh carried away before them. Yahweh, the Lord carried them away. He defeated all these ites and their gods. Because in their mind, they were regional. The God of the mountain, the God of the plain, the God at the ocean, the God of the ocean, the God of the coast. In their mind, that's the pagan mindset. And so they did wicked things. They provoked the Lord. They provoked Yahweh to anger. They served idols, to which Yahweh had said to them. Oh boy. And now we could just run to Deuteronomy and read it. You shall not do this. In fact, it's over and over and over. And I almost just did that tonight. Just go to Deuteronomy and just start reading. But, all the way through Deuteronomy, if you do this, this is what will happen to you. They haven't crossed the sea or the Jordan River yet. And he warns them and warns them and warns them. And he says, this is what you're going to do. I'm telling you, don't do it. If you do it, this is what's going to happen. And because of God's patience and long suffering, he let them last as long as he did. But the end was exactly what God says it would be, because God doesn't guess. He's sovereign. He's omniscient. He knows exactly what they'll do. Don't do this. You shall not do this. Verse 13. Yet Yahweh warned Israel and Judah. He warned them both. He warned Israel and Judah. And the thing about it is this. Eventually when we get to Judah and you begin to look at Jeremiah, which we haven't got to yet, he's going to say it in Kings, and he's going to say it in Jeremiah. He's going to say it in the prophets that are left. You, Judah, were worse than your sister Israel. And when I read that the first time, years ago, I'm like, no way. How could that be? Well, they've got 722 to 586. Well, let's go just 605. They've got a long time to go. This is what happened. We need to straighten up. They had kings that led them to straighten up, Josiah being one of them. But some people would straighten up, but for the most part, they just couldn't lay off the paganism. They just couldn't lay off of it. And so, this is what's going on. You shall not do this, yet Yahweh warned Israel and Judah by every prophet and every seer, every prophet, bunch of prophets we don't know the name of, to the prophets we do know the name of. Every prophet, every seer, saying, turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes in accordance with all the law that I commanded your fathers and that I sent to you by my servants, the prophets. whom you killed. That's not here, but that's what you're going to see later and later, all the way to the New Testament. Jesus is going to say, you're the ones, it's you. People just like you kill the prophets. But verse 14, they would not listen. They were stubborn, but were stubborn as their fathers had been, who did not believe in Yahweh their Elohim, the I Am, who is the Creator, the covenant God, who is the Creator. They didn't believe in the Lord their God. On top of not believing, the not believing means you're still in your sin, and so you despise His statutes. Verse 15, they despised His statutes. They despised the Ten Commandments. They despised the law. They despised His statutes and His covenant that He made with their fathers and the warnings that He gave them. They went after false idols and became false. And they followed the nations that were around them, concerning whom Yahweh, the Lord, had commanded them that they should not do like them. They abandoned all the commandments of the Lord, their God, and made for themselves metal images of 2 calves. And they made an Asherah and worshipped all the host of heaven and served Baal. And they burned their sons and their daughters as offerings and used divination and omens and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of Yahweh, Lord, provoking Him to anger. Therefore Yahweh was very angry with Israel and removed them out of His sight and scatters them. None was left but the tribe of Judah only. Boy, I'm glad we got Judah. Good old Judah. Look at the next verse. Judah also did not keep the commandments of Yahweh their Elohim, the Lord their God, but walked in the customs that Israel had introduced. The Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel and afflicted them and gave them into the hand of plunderers until He had cast them out of His sight. When He had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, king. Jeroboam drove Israel from following Yahweh and made them commit great sin. The people of Israel walked in all the sins of that Jeroboam did, and what have we seen all the way through? The writer of Kings wants you to remember, Jeroboam started this. Even Jeroboam II, he wants you to know, no, that's not the Jeroboam we've been talking about. Jeroboam did this. Jeroboam started this. Jeroboam's the one that's guilty. When he had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. And Jeroboam drove Israel from following Yahweh and made them commit great sin. The people of Israel walked in all the sins that Jeroboam did. They did not depart from them until the Lord, or until Yahweh removed Israel out of His sight, as He had spoken by all His servants the prophets. So Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day. I remember being in Russia in 93 and dealing with lots of Jewish Ukrainians. They were leaving. That's the big talk. Going to Israel. We're leaving for Israel. We're going to Israel. And I asked the Jewish missionary who'd been saved at First Baptist Jacksonville in Florida, and he's a missionary there, what is the deal with all these Russian-Ukrainians wanting to go to Israel? And he said, look, they're going home. And don't you remember what the Bible says, that in the last days, this is what they're going to go. They're going to go back. Listen, they're coming back from Ethiopia. They're coming back from all parts of North Africa. They're coming back from Russia. They're coming back from Ukraine. They are going back to Israel. It's still happening. And I don't know if you've noticed this the last months. But there's a big deal going on right now about Jews in Israel coming to Christ. And in fact, so much so that there's a whole ministry now just handing New Testaments, because they've got the Old Testament, handing New Testaments out. And there's a lot of Jews that are seeing this, and God just opening their eyes. So, they're exiled. And God promises that one day they'll come home. Which looks like that's what's going on in a big way. So the king of Assyria brought people from, here's what comes back to Israel. He takes Israel away. This is who comes back. He brings people back from Babylon to Cutha, from Ava, Hamath, Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria. All over Samaria, all over northern Israel. He places them in their cities instead of the people of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and lived in its cities. And at the beginning of their dwelling there, they did not fear Yahweh. This is so weird. So, they didn't fear Yahweh, so the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. And the king of Assyria was told that, hey, the lions are killing all these new people we've placed in northern Israel. And Israel, what do we do? And the nations that you have carried away and placed in the city of Samaria, they don't know the law of the God of the land. They've been taken from this God's region, and they've been placed in another God's region, and they just don't know the law, and they're getting in trouble because they're in a new God's region. They've got to get in touch with that God. That's why. Therefore, he has sent lions among them, and behold, they're killing them, because they do not know the law of the God of the land. Well, maybe it's because you brought your pagan practices with you on holy soil. So the king of Assyria, being the politician that he is, commanded, all right, look, you do not want a northern kingdom Levite. That's not who you want. But that's all you had to work with. They went and dug him up a priest. I can't imagine a bigger mess. They found a priest from Israel. The king of Israel commanded, send one of the priests. A priest from which golden altar? The northern one or the southern one in northern Israel? Which priest? What a pathetic thing to go send these pitiful people. The last thing they need is a northern Israel priest. Anyway, send there one of the priests whom you carried away from there, and let him go and dwell there, and teach him the law of the El, the God, the little g, the God of the land. Here's a pagan trying to fix a lion problem by sending a pagan that happens to be Jewish, that's been carried away because of their sin, back to try to lead them to follow the God of this region so that the lion attacks will stop. It's just exactly like that airplane I was on, the airplane company I was on in Nepal. They were having crashes. They were crashing airplanes in the Himalayas. And it was bad for business. So they brought a shaman to the airport, and he killed a goat. And they rubbed the goat's blood on all the airplanes to try to fix it. I'm going to get on one of those airplanes. I mean, you see that? It's exactly that. Paganism trying to stop some realistic problem of sin with some superstitious pagan. Theirs was mechanical, for goodness sake. I was hoping my plane didn't have any goat's blood on it. So one of the priests whom they carried away from Samaria came and lived in Bethel and taught them how they should fear Yahweh. Really? Well, I hope it was halfway true. I hope he gets the name right. The Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. He gets the name right. He goes there to teach them how they should fear Yahweh, the Lord. But every nation still made gods of its own and put them in the shrines of the high places that the Samaritans had made. Every nation in the cities in which they lived, the men of Babylon made Succoth-Benoth. The men of Cuth made Nergal. The men of Hamath made Ashima. The Avites made Nibhaz and Tartak. And the Shephervites burned their children in the fire of Adramelech and Anamelech, the gods of Sepharvaim. Verse 32. They also feared the Lord. They included Yahweh. Listen, it's exactly like witnessing to a Hindu. You got to be careful with them, buddy. One more God is not a problem. It's not a problem. Well, yes. That's where you better be crystal clear in your gospel presentation, and you better be clear in the quote unquote invitation. Because they will flat do whatever you want them to do, because one more God is not going to hurt out of all the thousands of gods. Anyway, here these pagans, they also feared Yahweh. I mean, they included him. They brought all their pagan stuff, and then they included Yahweh. They're in Yahweh's land. Let's just be good to Yahweh. What does he want us to do? They feared Yahweh. They also feared Yahweh. They also feared Yahweh, feared the Lord, and appointed from among themselves all sorts of people as priests of the high places who sacrificed for them in the shrines of the high places. So they feared Yahweh, but also served their own gods, after the manner of the nations from among whom they had been carried away. To this day, they do according to the former manner. They do not fear Yahweh. And they do not follow the statutes or the rules or the law or the commandment that Yahweh commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel. Yahweh made a covenant. The Lord made a covenant with them and commanded them, you shall not fear other gods or bow yourselves to them or serve them or sacrifice to them, but you shall fear Yahweh, who brought you out of the land of Egypt with great power and with an outstretched arm. You shall bow yourselves to him, and to him you shall sacrifice. And the statutes and the rules and the law and the commandment that he wrote for you, you shall always be careful to do. You shall not fear other gods, other Els. And you shall not forget the covenant that I made with you. You shall not fear other gods. You shall not fear, but you shall fear the Lord your God, the Yahweh your Elohim. And he will deliver you out of the hand of all your enemies. However, they would not listen, but they did according to their former manner. So, those nations feared Yahweh and also served their carved images. Their children did likewise, and their children's children, as their fathers did, so they do to this day. And that's where we leave the northern kingdom in 2 Kings, in paganism. And so the rest of this is going to deal with Judah. Any questions or comments here? I don't have my watch, so I don't have no idea what time it is. What time is it?
7.
So, any comments or questions? You're dealing with one mess to another mess. All right, let's pray together. Now, Lord, we thank you for your word.